On the banks of the River Arve in Geneva are the headquarters for the French-speaking national television station TSR. In 2004, the Swiss Broadcasting Corporation launched an international architecture competition to renovate it. The tower now has a new look. In 1968, Geneva architect Arthur Bugnard drew up plans for one of the first ever high-rise office blocks in Switzerland. The building radically transformed the Geneva landscape. As in other buildings from that period, large quantities of asbestos were used for fire prevention. But at the start of this century, the TSR directors decided to clean up the entire building. The TSR Tower, now called RTS, or Radio-Télévision Suisse, was Switzerland's largest ever decontamination project. Entire floors were sealed off, while staff continued to produce TV programs on the lower levels. Over an 11-month period, each square centimetre of concrete had to be scraped to eliminate all traces of asbestos. 400 tons of waste in total. While this monumental project was going on, the 15 architect studios taking part in the competition worked on designs for the new office block, with a letter from the TSR director Gilles Marchand as their only guideline.
A building is not just about walls, concrete, and windows. A building is also a way of thinking. It's the embodiment of an activity. The Swiss Broadcasting Corporation asked me to write a letter defining the purpose of the building. Beyond the technical and public health issues, what is the company's vision of the future? What kind of symbolic role should it play once it's renovated?
Alors la RTS s'est lancée dans un vaste projet immobilier dont le point culminant dans tous les sens du terme est la rénovation complète de la tour du quai Ernest Ansermet.
The project by Geneva-based architects Devontrey and Lemunière won the competition, but they first had to find out the strengths and weaknesses of the building.
We were confronted with the existing tower block, which we knew well, but we wanted to transform it somehow. That was one of the first things that seemed important to us. It could no longer remain this restrained object, like the black block at the end of the film 2001: A Space Odyssey, which was kind of abstract.
It's interesting to keep the building materials. It's a basic principle, when it's possible and worth doing. In this case it was, especially as there was this large area that we couldn't rebuild, because you're not allowed to build a new high-rise there.
RTS is and will remain a generalist, pluralist, open, innovative and friendly media that relates to its viewers.
RTS wanted the architects to use ideas of openness, transparency, fluidity and communication to radically transform the building. Their project, known as The City on Each Floor, reflects this desire for openness.
We had this idea that the city was a place for exchanges, and that it would probably be possible to encourage exchanges between people inside the building. And there was this play on words, the city on each floor and life on each floor. It had to be lively. We believe that architecture cannot really create life, but it can help make things happen.
These big open spaces between floors, called atriums, meet the need for better fluidity inside the building, as Gilles Marchand requested. There are 3 of them with distinctive colors: red, blue and green, the 3 basic colors used to create a TV image.
The architects suggested building atriums which kind of break up this stack of floors. The stairs allow people to move around inside the tower without using the elevator.
The TV studios inside the tower aren't separate, since they're connected by a lift. From here I can quickly go to see my colleagues on the floor above and meet them in a nice place. What I think you can say about atriums and the challenge they pose is that they're relatively simple. They make it look as if something's happening on the outside, but it happens almost naturally, like a fluid movement from the part with mirrors like pixels to a very traditional glass section, to a very large window. There was a technological challenge at the end, but that's not the interesting part. The interesting thing is the space we install, what we see. The big 12-meter-high windows had to be able to resist the impact of horizontal winds. Normally, you'd need pillars this high to do the job.
Our architecture is exactly the opposite of what one would expect. We want the effect, but we don't want it to be visible. So that the innovation doesn't become the element of expression. On the contrary, it has to disappear completely.
The architects are keen to make the structure disappear, as one of the goals is to open up the tower for the viewing public.
The notions of openness and transparency are values that can be found in the company's charter, whether or not you have a building. Our charter, for example, insists on openness in our programming.
Those were the kinds of issues that we as architects could relate to. What does transparency mean? What does it mean to have, for example, a window that goes right down to the ground? They used to come down to here. So from the outside, you will also be able to look into the offices. It's a way of telling viewers, listen, the people who work on these shows, you can see them in the flesh too, not just on screen.
You can't ignore the symbolic importance of this tower block. It's the embodiment of television in the heart of the city. It illustrates the size of the company, at least from a French-speaking perspective. It symbolizes the numerous layers and combinations needed to produce a TV show.
C'est très intéressant parce qu'un média, c'est à la fois
It's very interesting. The media is an activity that influences the context in which it operates, as it chooses to focus on a certain subject or take a certain journalistic or editorial angle. At the same time, it mirrors the context in which it finds itself. The architects wanted this building to perfectly reflect the context it's in throughout the day.
It's what we call a reactive facade, which lets the weather and the climate play with the building, and the TV tower is television. It's a moving image. In a sense, it's our reaction to the theme. The wave phenomenon, the reflection of the countryside and the flatness, I feel that it was very important that this volume should remain a totally flat space. So when you walk around the base of the tower, you're always hemmed in, but you have a tactile, sensual relationship with this surface that reflects various images. On the ground floor, the images are more closely linked with the Arve landscape. The existing building and the upper parts are more a reflection of the sky, the fact that the weather's good or bad. That'll change every day.
Gilles Marchand's initial letter also stressed the symbolic aspect of the tower. This translated into the revolutionary idea of the creation of a jutting extension or cantilever.
There is this impressive cantilever on the site, an eye on the city and in itself eye-catching. When you're inside, you can see right across the French-speaking region. The locals can also see the extension. We thought you could film from here and produce live programs. You could see a demonstration at the Place des Nations and broadcast it. There is this dual idea.
Nevertheless, it was a challenge also during the construction to build at this height over the recording studios. Recordings were still going on during this period. The builders had to be quiet. And we had to get a huge crane inside to build this cantilever. It was a real event.
Here we are with a 50-meter drop below us. If that's the tower, we built a kind of beak, the 6 meters that Ines talked about. You have to support the 6 meters. To hold it all up, there's the tower facade that goes down 50 to 60 meters. Then with these arms at 45 degrees, we can hold this load. The cantilever acts as a kind of bracket, and then you have this support. There's also this big beam running across the whole length. We used tie beams to suspend the floor on which we're now standing. In theory, it's relatively simple, but technically it's quite complicated. And building was really difficult, as we were suspended in the air.
There was a real concern about communicating with the environment in which we find ourselves. It's not just a rigid building, but a tower that goes much further. It's very interesting to step outside the box.
In terms of the cantilever, the most difficult aspect was not coming up with the idea, but managing to do it at all. The question was, could we afford it? We probably won the competition because of the cantilever, but if we'd had to make savings, that would have been the easiest thing to cut.
While the renovated high-rise building gives a contemporary feel to the city, there are other challenges on the horizon. On the other side of the Arve River, the La Praille and Acacia industrial zone is earmarked for huge housing development projects. The new RTS tower is likely to be seen as a role model in the expansion of the city at the foot of Lake Geneva.